The most dangerous negotiator in any room is never the smartest one. It's the one everyone believes might actually be insane. The Madman Theory is the most powerful political weapon ever invented. And here's what almost no one knows. Donald Trump didn't create it. It was engineered in secret by a Cold War president who flew nuclear bombers towards Soviet territory, deliberately, as a negotiating tactic. The question isn't whether the strategy works. History proved it does. The question is Trump applying it deliberately, or does he actually believe his own chaos? If you're ready for an uncomfortable truth about how power really operates, stay until the end. Most people won't make it there. If you do, you'll understand something about global strategy that most political analysts are still afraid to say out loud. Calculated or genuine. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the Madman Theory is, how it nearly triggered nuclear war, and why the most terrifying answer to that question might be the one that surprises you most. Most people assume that political chaos is a sign of weakness. They have had it exactly backwards all along. In 1968, Richard Nixon sat down with his chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, and said something that should have been classified forever. He said, and I'm quoting directly from Haldeman's published diary, "I call it the Madman Theory. I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached the point where I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word to them that, for God's sake, Nixon is obsessed about communists. We can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has his hand on the nuclear button. I call it the Madman Theory. We can't restrain him when he's angry." Nixon understood something about power that most politicians never grasp. The threat of irrational action is more powerful than rational action itself. A man who plays by the rules is predictable. A man who might flip the table at any moment has real leverage. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, calculated strategy developed at the most dangerous moment in human history. And Haldeman wrote every word of it down in a memoir published in 1978. The question is, did it work? And is someone using the exact same strategy in your headlines right now? Power through chaos. Here's something game theory teaches us that sounds completely paradoxical. Rational actors fear irrational ones more than they fear other rational opponents. Unpredictability is the most underrated weapon in any negotiation. Think about it carefully. If I'm negotiating with someone whose moves I can predict, I can prepare. I can model outcomes, run scenarios, build defenses. But if I'm negotiating with someone who might do anything, walk away from everything, escalate without warning, blow up the entire framework at 3 in the morning, I have to be cautious. I have to give more. I have to concede. Thomas Schelling, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who transformed our understanding of nuclear deterrence, argued in his foundational 1960 work that credible threats depend not just on capability, but on the believability of using that capability irrationally. The less predictable you are, the more credible your threats become. This is the mathematical foundation beneath the Madman Theory. And here's the thing. If this kind of deep strategic analysis makes you see the world differently, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the hidden mechanics of power. There is so much more coming. Now, Nixon didn't just theorize about this, he actually executed it. And what happened next almost ended the world as we know it. What I'm about to tell you is documented in declassified government records, and it sounds completely insane. In October 1969, Nixon secretly ordered the U.S. military to execute Operation Giant Lance. 18 B-52 Stratofortress bombers, each carrying nuclear weapons, flew toward the Soviet Union for 18 consecutive hours, not as a training exercise, as a deliberate diplomatic signal. 18 nuclear bombers flying toward Soviet airspace on purpose, as a negotiating tactic. Soviet radar detected the aircraft. The Kremlin panicked, and Nixon achieved his immediate goal. He demonstrated to the most powerful adversary on Earth that he was unpredictable enough to risk nuclear confrontation. Moscow subsequently increased pressure on Hanoi to negotiate. Henry Kissinger later confirmed in his memoirs that Nixon wanted to convey to the Soviets that he was a dangerous leader who might resort to extreme measures. One man's deliberate performance of instability moved an entire nuclear superpower. The operation remained classified for decades. When documents were finally released, historians were stunned that a sitting president had used nuclear theater as a routine diplomatic instrument. And now, here's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Because what Nixon did in 1969 and what appears in your news feed today share something so fundamental that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Before Trump was president, he was a negotiator, and he was remarkably specific and remarkably public about his methods. In The Art of the Deal, published in 1987, decades before anyone seriously imagined him seeking the presidency, Trump wrote that the key to any deal isn't information or superior logic. It's the atmosphere you create around yourself. He wrote, "I aim very high, and then I just keep pushing and pushing to get what I'm after." But there's a less famous passage that matters far more for what we're discussing today. "I like being unpredictable. It keeps people off balance." Off balance, that's the operating word. When Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on China in 2018, every mainstream economist predicted catastrophe. Markets plunged. Allied governments protested. But here's what happened behind the closed doors the headlines missed. China came to the table, not because the tariffs were economically brilliant. By most measures, they weren't. But because Beijing's top strategists could not reliably predict what Trump would do next. Would he escalate further? Would he reverse course with a single tweet? Would he declare victory and pivot entirely overnight? The unpredictable move forces every opponent to play permanent defense. The uncertainty itself became the weapon. This is the Madman Theory operating without nuclear bombers. Same principle, 21st century application. But was Trump channeling Nixon consciously, or is this something far more complicated? Here's where we need to separate two fundamentally different things: unpredictability as accident and unpredictability as architecture. Consider Trump's relationship with NATO. Every allied nation in the Western alliance had spent 70 years knowing exactly how the United States would respond in a crisis. Mutual defense, guaranteed support, completely predictable commitment. Trump systematically dismantled that expectation. He repeatedly questioned Article 5, the foundational treaty principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all, in ways that made traditional allies genuinely uncertain about the reliability of American commitments. Critics called this reckless and destabilizing. But from a Madman Theory perspective, doubt creates leverage. When NATO allies aren't certain of automatic American protection, they increase their own defense spending, which was precisely what Trump publicly demanded. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom all increased military budgets significantly during his first term. Trump called this a success. Measured by his stated objective, it was. The same structural pattern repeated with Mexico on immigration, with the Paris Climate Accord withdrawal, with Iran after abandoning the nuclear deal. Each reversal, each unpredictable move, forced other parties to recalibrate and concede. Chaos, when deliberate, becomes the most effective form of control. This pattern is consistent enough to raise a truly disturbing question. Is this accidental improvisation or engineered chaos? Because here's where it gets even more unsettling. In 2017, Trump called Kim Jong-un Little Rocket Man from the floor of the United Nations General Assembly. Diplomats gasped visibly. Seasoned foreign policy veterans called it catastrophically reckless. The world braced for escalation toward war. 8 months later, Trump and Kim were shaking hands in Singapore. A sitting U.S. president and the North Korean dictator meeting face to face for the first time in history. Checkmate. Whether those talks produced lasting denuclearization is deeply debatable. They largely didn't. But something remarkable and historically unprecedented happened in between. North Korea suspended its nuclear weapons testing program, not because of direct military action, but because even Kim Jong-un, a man who had spent his entire life studying American patterns, could not reliably predict what Trump would actually do next. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu's 2,000-year-old principle, operating in modern geopolitics in real time. Make your opponent believe you're capable of anything, and they become cautious. Cautious adversaries make concessions. The identical dynamic appeared with Iran after Trump withdrew from the nuclear agreement. Maximum pressure combined with maximum unpredictability, followed by surprising offers for direct personal dialogue. The combination created genuine strategic paralysis. Creating genuine doubt in your opponent's mind is itself a form of power. But here's where the honest analysis must acknowledge something uncomfortable. What happens when the madman genuinely miscalculates? Every strategy contains its own failure mode, and the Madman Theory contains a catastrophic one. Nixon's version did not end the Vietnam War on his terms. He extracted real concessions from Moscow, yes, but the war dragged on for 7 more years after Operation Giant Lance flew towards Soviet airspace. Why? Because the North Vietnamese made their own strategic calculation. They believed America would eventually withdraw, regardless of how unstable Nixon appeared. The strategy designed to end the war only prolonged its suffering for 7 more years. We're right. The Madman Theory works when your opponent believes you are willing to sacrifice everything, including yourself. When they call your bluff or simply outlast you, the entire structure collapses. For Trump, financial markets exposed this failure mode with brutal precision. Every unpredictable tariff announcement created economic volatility that cascaded back onto American farmers, manufacturers, and consumers. Allies who were genuinely uncertain about U.S. commitment began building permanent alternatives. The EU deepened its own defense cooperation. China accelerated economic workarounds. There is a thin and often invisible line between strategic madness and actual destructive chaos. The brutal truth most analysts won't say plainly. Sometimes the actor forgets which role is the performance. When that line disappears entirely, the strategy begins consuming itself. But the insight that comes next, this one changes the entire framework we've been building. Right now, in real time, every major power on Earth has fundamentally recalibrated its strategic planning in response to American unpredictability at the highest levels. China has dramatically accelerated its timeline for economic self-sufficiency, not because Trump is a strategic genius, but because Beijing's planners literally cannot build reliable long-range projections when foundational rules change overnight without warning. The European Union has formally adopted what it calls strategic autonomy. Russia has probed Western alliance commitments with new boldness. Even close traditional allies like Japan and South Korea have quietly developed contingency frameworks that would have been politically unimaginable a decade ago. Uncertainty permanently rewrites strategy. This is the global strategic chessboard being reorganized around a single variable: unpredictability. And here's what makes this genuinely remarkable. Whether these restructurings are the intended consequences of genius-level strategic design or the unintended byproducts of impulsive leadership, the geopolitical effect is completely identical. Historian Jeffrey Engel at Southern Methodist University has documented how American unpredictability in the Nixon era permanently altered Soviet strategic calculations for decades afterward. The Soviets never fully recovered certainty about American red lines. 1. China accelerates economic independence. 2. EU formally pursues strategic autonomy. 3. Russia tests alliance commitments. 4. Allies develop private contingency plans. The same structural shift is accelerating right now, which brings us, finally, to the answer you've been waiting for since we started. Here is the most disturbing insight that emerges from everything we've explored together. It doesn't matter whether Donald Trump is a genius consciously applying Nixon's Madman Theory, having studied it, internalized it, and weaponized it with cold calculation, or whether he is a genuinely impulsive leader who naturally and instinctively embodies unpredictability. The strategic effect is completely identical. Adversaries cannot tell the difference, and because they cannot tell, they must respond to the worst-case scenario. This is the final and most sophisticated evolution of the Madman Theory. You don't have to be a madman to wield the strategic power of one. You only need to make the world genuinely believe you might be. The power to hurt is the power to coerce. Nobel Prize-winning game theorist Thomas Schelling proved this mathematically. In any strategic interaction, Genuine uncertainty about your opponent's limits is more constraining to their behavior than any actual limit they impose. You don't need to launch the bombers. You need people to genuinely believe you might. Nixon knew this and performed instability as a calculated role. Trump may be performing it with equal deliberateness, or he may have inhabited the performance so completely that it has become indistinguishable from who he actually is. At that point, strategically speaking, there is no functional difference whatsoever. The performance and the reality have merged into the same weapon. Unpredictability is power, whether it is real or performed. Is this genius or genuine madness? Comment genius or madman right now. I read every single one. And if understanding this changes how you see power in the world, share this video with as many people as you possibly can. This truth needs to reach far beyond this comment section. Here is the answer that has been hiding inside everything we've explored. The question we opened with wasn't really, is Trump crazy? It was something deeper and more consequential. Does the distinction between calculated madness and genuine madness actually matter in strategic terms? History answers this with uncomfortable clarity. The most powerful move is always the one your opponent cannot explain or predict. Nixon performed madness and achieved measurable strategic effects. If Trump is performing, the effects are equally real. If Trump genuinely embodies unpredictability as a core trait, the strategic effects are still real. The madman and the skilled actor who plays a madman are, in strategic terms, functionally equivalent. But here's the deeper truth that extends far beyond presidents and geopolitics. This principle operates in every human negotiation where power is at stake. Every business deal, every difficult relationship, every conversation where someone is trying to manage you, predict you, or contain your options. Predictable people get managed. The person who seems most genuinely willing to walk away from the entire table has the most leverage at that table. The person whose next move others cannot confidently predict has the most freedom of action. The Madman Theory isn't just a Cold War relic or a political era observation. It is a fundamental principle of how power actually operates between human beings in every domain. See IT now, and now that you've seen it clearly, you will notice it everywhere. The truth is stranger than anything you could make up. So here is where we end. Not with a conclusion, but with a mirror held up to how power actually works in the world. The Madman Theory began as Richard Nixon's secret weapon, whispered in a private conversation and recorded in a diary. It nearly triggered nuclear war. It was buried in classified files for decades. And somehow, 50 years later, its precise logic emerged again at the absolute center of global politics. Whether by conscious design or by sheer historical coincidence, strategy outlives every strategist. Whether you see Trump as a genius executing sophisticated four-dimensional strategy or as a genuinely unpredictable force reshaping the world by pure instinct, you now understand something most people watching the same headlines will never grasp. The strategic effect is identical either way. And that, perhaps more than any specific policy outcome, is the most unsettling truth in modern geopolitics. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. The Madman Theory is simply Machiavelli with nuclear weapons and a social media account. Power, in its rawest historical form, has always belonged not to the strongest, but to the most unpredictable. If you made it this far, comment Madman Theory below. It tells me you're among the very few who now understand how power actually operates at the highest levels of human civilization. The truth is stranger than anything you could make up.